A very good evening from Mumbai and a warm welcome to each of you. I welcome you to the 5th edition of the Bloomberg India Economic Forum, an annual gathering where we bring together some of the best minds to discuss some of the most pressing issues confronting our country. But before we move on to these conversations, a few messages. In keeping with tradition here at Bloomberg, we want our audience to engage with us this evening. On the left side of the screen, you will find the menu button from where you can send in questions for our speakers, participate in audience polls, or reach out to the Bloomberg team. Also, I encourage you to tweet or post on social from this event with the hashtag Bloomberg India. But first, to warm up, let's go straight to the first audience poll of this evening. Again, you can find it on the menu options on the left side of your screen. What sort of recovery do you predict for India's economy? V-shaped, which means a sharp rebound, K-shaped, where the rich get richer and the poor poorer, a U-shaped recovery, which means only a slow recovery, or L-shaped, which means an extremely prolonged slowdown. Let's give it a few seconds for your answers to come in. I can see them moving. That's interesting. A few more seconds, perhaps. Oh, I can see them changing now, but there's one constant. And still, I see most expect a K-shaped recovery, though the numbers are changing. Let's give it a few seconds more before we call it. And I think we can call it here, can't we? It seems consistently the K-shaped recovery seems to be ahead. Oh wait, the L-shaped is moving up. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty much neck to neck between those of you who think it's a K-shaped recovery and an L-shaped. Let's now move on to somebody whom I know keeps a very close eye on what people think. Ashlesh Gosen, Head of South Asia Sales for Bloomberg.
Thank you, Janet. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Bloomberg India Economic Forum. When we started planning for this forum in the beginning of the year, we had absolutely no idea that we would be forced to do the event on a virtual platform like this. Nobody would have imagined that in October, we would be talking about an India that has seen the worst growth contraction among the major economies, or an India that is home to the second highest number of coronavirus infections. Not just that, the geopolitical situation is in a delicate balance. Seems far from the ideal. But can India use this crisis to reinvent itself? And how will the government revitalize the economy? This evening, we'll get some great perspective from some of the most influential and respected policymakers and the captains of the industry. I'm very pleased to welcome the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, who delivered the keynote address, followed by the Biocon's chairperson, Dr. Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, to give us the much-needed perspective on the race of the COVID-19 vaccine and India's preparedness to deal with the large-scale fallout of this pandemic. And finally, we are also going to be joined by the Carlyle Group's co-chairman and co-founder, David Rubinstein, who will be in conversation with Kotak Mahindra Bank's managing director, Uday Kotak himself. And we will hear next from Bloomberg's chairman, Peter Grauer, as he shares his thought on building resilience in crisis. As the country navigates the challenge of bouncing back from the economic downturn, one thing is very, very certain, that we are in the uncharted territory, and the winner from this crisis are going to be those that tackle it head on, with innovation driven out of purpose rather than chance. I don't want to take too much time. We have a power-packed evening. Once again, I would like to thank you all for joining us in this evening, and I do hope to meet you all in person. Thank you very much. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you, Ashlesh. Yes, power-packed lineup indeed. So let's go straight to Bloomberg's chairman, Peter Grauer, who will talk about his experience interacting with CEOs across the world during these unprecedented times.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the annual Bloomberg India Economic Forum. This is our 5th year since we've been hosting the summit, and of course, the first time we're doing it virtually. This forum has evolved into one of the most important events on India's business calendar, right from the first edition where we hosted Prime Minister Modi. Over the years, we've had the pleasure of hosting top policymakers and captains of industry, and I'm eagerly looking forward to hear from External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, David Rubenstein, Uday Kotak, and Kiran Mazumdar this evening. 2020 has been an extraordinary year, and even more so for India, with the impact of COVID-19 unlikely to blow over anytime soon. But as we continue to grapple with these challenging and uncertain times, I do believe that a global crisis like this provides an unmissable opportunity for businesses, particularly in the financial sector, to build resilience. One of the few positives from the pandemic has been that the world is now even more connected than ever before. And in this virtual world, I've had the opportunity of meeting many top policymakers and CEOs even more regularly, albeit virtually. What I see emerging is a shared mindset among leaders in government, business, and society to continue to push forward for inclusive progress in shaping world markets and a resilient global financial system. The pandemic has resulted in the finance industry experiencing unprecedented changes across a wide spectrum, with most of the sector having to drive their operations in new and virtual ways. The paradigm is shifting, and it's shifting fast. At Bloomberg, we see firsthand every day how the need for reliable, scalable, automated data and technology systems and capabilities has been accelerated. We now live in a world where delivering virtual financial services is the norm, with a need to stay connected to secure trading and compliance systems while working from home. New ways of working have emerged all across the world that will likely be a permanent shift in many respects. Globally, firms are now emerging and embracing new technology that has to remain resilient, secure, and scalable in a far more complex and remote environment. Governments and regulators have to now monitor and steward these shifts to ensure compliance and integrity continues in new systems. Amid all of this change in market volatility, data and technology have become more vital than ever in making sense of these market dislocations and successfully navigating through them. For our part, Bloomberg will continue to be a trusted partner, providing best-in-class data, market-moving information and news, as well as robust technology systems. So we play our part to help advance the markets. Here in India, we're working hard to provide greater access for global investors to your financial market through strategic partnerships and through our enterprise data and technology. We're collaborating and helping clients in India automate their workflows and optimize their processes so they can make faster, more informed, and better investment decisions. We continue to invest in our risk management solutions to help Indian corporations remain resilient and navigate the dynamic regulatory environment. A year ago, when we hosted Prime Minister Modi at our Global Business Forum in New York, we announced two key objectives in partnership with the Government of India, focused on strengthening international investment. These two initiatives, partnering with India to navigate inclusion in global benchmark indices and supporting the development of India's gift city, are progressing at a good pace despite the challenging times. I truly believe that in times of great challenge, there is also great opportunity for the bold to achieve real change and progress. The Indian government has charted an ambitious agenda to unlock India's growth potential. I'm very pleased that we can play our part to ease access to India's capital markets. As we forge ahead and look forward to 2021, the year which will mark 25 years of Bloomberg's presence in India, we will continue to enable global investors to access India and connect India's financial institutions to international opportunities. With that, I'll pass it on to Jeanette Rodriguez, Bloomberg's Mumbai Bureau Chief. Thank you once again for joining this evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, again, and thank you.
Thank you, Peter. At Bloomberg, we take pride in enabling global investors to access India. But we also look to explain India as its market heft gains importance in the world. Our keynote speaker today is at the forefront of this effort. Dr. S. Jaishankar has served India in several capacities as diplomat, foreign secretary, and today as Honorable Minister for External Affairs. Minister Jaishankar, thank you for your presence with us this evening, and we look forward to your message.
Thank you. May I start? Let me begin by saying it's a great pleasure to join you all this evening. We are meeting even as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to remain the dominant context. I've been asked to share my thoughts about turning the geopolitical crisis into an opportunity. And so let me begin by stating that I'm glad that the term used is geopolitical rather than just the pandemic, for among the important realizations that we must address is the fact that many of the key stresses that will shape the world predate the pandemic and in some senses are really structural. So if I could say this, pre-existing issues and comorbidities are apparently as relevant in international relations as they are in public health. Now, it is customary on such occasions to start by emphasizing how much we are missing the good old times and hoping for a return to the real rather than the virtual life. Now, I will not do that. I will not do that, not because I'm a contrarian, but to emphasize that importance of adapting to change rather than resisting it. We are in the midst of the most catastrophic global event since the Second World War. And one of its consequences will be that those living in extreme poverty will increase for the first time in a quarter century. But there are other results as well, among them how countries perceive national security and global trade so much more differently than before. The additional stresses on the global system will surely aggravate its already difficult predicament. We may be interacting today in a hybrid mode, but in many ways do so in a hybrid world. The old, the emerging, and the over the horizon coexist, and it's reading them right to draw policy conclusions that are really going to be the challenges that we will all face. Now, bear in mind that we are far from a static landscape, and each of these multiple realities that I refer to are also in transition. So revisiting assumptions is therefore just as important as reviewing strategy, and put simply, a difficult world has become even more complicated. Now that brings me to the geopolitical issue. At the heart of the changes in current world politics is a fundamental rebalancing of the international system. More countries count today than they did before, and naturally we have moved from the G7 to the G20. But we also need to assign different weightages to different players, not just the United States and China, but others, including India. And the metrics of measuring power is now very different. It's not merely military, but finance, trade, connectivity, data, technology, and as we have discovered recently, even masks and ventilators. In my business, we call it multipolarity, which means more players relevant to outcomes. And that obviously calls for a very different architecture from the times when there were two camps led by the US and USSR, or just the dominance of the United States. It means not just doing diplomacy differently on a one-to-one or collective basis, but also forming working arrangements with those who have converging interests. A particular challenge for the international community is to come to terms with the sharper contradictions between the United States and China, and the consequent operational difficulties in the absence of common ground. The short point again here is that both the landscape and the nature of global politics were already changing before the pandemic. What the COVID-19 did was to contribute additional layers of complexity in a range of dimensions. Now, why would we look at the world differently today than we would say on January 1st? To begin with, because of a greater distrust of the merits of globalization as it is currently defined. And the last part of this phrasing, as it is currently defined, is particularly important. We have already seen domestic debates on social and economic costs of globalization translate into political outcomes across the world. In the course of the last few years, it also morphed into concerns about global shifts of power and influence. Now, what COVID-19 has gone and done is to give us a much more existential meaning through health security, trade security, and job security. The second factor is a better awareness of what globalization is really about. We traditionally tend to think of trade, finance, and mobility, but it is equally about the more indivisible challenges of climate change, pandemics, and terrorism. We cannot be in denial of interdependence, but we can certainly argue about its degree and terms, its benefits and risks. And that is taking the shape, amongst others, of conversations about resilient supply chains. If the world needs more trusted and capable players, India needs to primarily focus on the latter attribute since it is well regarded on the former score. As a pluralistic and open society with a market economy, it is systemically in sync with the rest of the world. Even during the pandemic, it ramped up its pharmaceutical production, especially of hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol, to respond to growing global demands. In fact, we supplied medicines to more than 150 countries, about half of them on a grant basis. Our medical teams were deployed in 4 of our neighbors who were in distress. But as we learned during this period, the challenges were much more of capabilities. At the beginning of the pandemic, in fact, India did not make PPEs, testing kits, or ventilators, and had a very basic capacity when it came to masks. Today, we have not just a sizable industry in this respect, but a growing record of exports as well. The lesson from that is of an India with greater capabilities, not just helping itself, but being a force of good in international relations. And that is why the outlook of Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, is important for the world. This is not about protectionism. It is about building greater strengths at home to play more effectively abroad. We are today in the midst of making multiple choices. It would be relatively easy for us to just focus on recovery. In many ways, getting back to where we were before is a very natural human trait. But in this crisis, we have ambitiously taken the road of opportunity. Those of you who follow developments in India would have noted a spate of major reforms recently in the domains of labor, agriculture, and education, amongst others. They parallel a sustained focus on making it easier to do business. If there is one major takeaway from the current pandemic, it is the enormous power of the digital. This has been visible in activities as diverse as contact tracing to delivering basic necessities, raising awareness, online education, and promoting commerce. Definitely, India will come out an even stronger digital power with the attendant consequences to the global knowledge economy. Now, what does all of this mean to contemporary geopolitics? To start with, it will shape the nature and terms of India's engagement with major economies like China, US, EU, Japan, ASEAN, etc. 2, the practices that India perfects at home become exportable abroad. They too will play out, obviously differently in different geographies. 3. Greater global conversations on resilient supply chains could play to India's advantage. Some of these are ongoing G2G exercises, others would be discussions with business. 4. India's own thinking about deeper global economic engagement with the world will be influenced both by the geopolitical divides and the pandemic pressures. There was already a reassessment of FTA experiences, keeping in mind the damaging impact they've had on India's manufacturing. The attention could now well shift to becoming part of a global value chains rather than entering into more formal trading arrangements. This would be so especially as making it easier to do business gains further traction. We are conscious of the need not just to improve on our own record, but to become competitive vis-à-vis the world. So let me conclude by returning to the theme of my remarks. We are heading for a more fractured and complicated world, one with greater multipolarity and less multilateralism. In all this change, the opportunities are certainly there. Seizing them will be the real test of our mettle. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Jaishankar. Multipolarities indeed, and the metrics of measuring power. At Bloomberg, we understand metrics very well, and of course, we will continue this conversation with Ruth Pollard, team leader for South and Southeast Asian government coverage. But first, a reminder to our audience. If you have any questions for Minister Jaishankar, please submit them via the Questions tab on the left side of your screen. I repeat, on the left side of your screen, you'll find the Questions tab, and Minister Jaishankar can receive your questions. If you wish to tweet from this event, please include the hashtag Bloomberg India. Now over to you, Ruth, for your conversation with Minister Jaishankar.
Thank you, Jeanette, and welcome again, Minister. We very much appreciate your time this evening. It's been described by, I think, both the US and Indian government officials as the elephant in the room, China. And I think that is what our audience will be most looking forward to hearing from you on tonight. So the presence of Chinese troops on India's borders has been one of the biggest concerns in these last few months. And it's been several weeks since you and your Chinese counterpart met in Moscow. Are you happy with the way that that agreement has been implemented so far?
Well, just for the record, I think the elephant in the room remark was an American remark. But anyway, put that aside. Where discussions with the Chinese are concerned, yes, I met my counterpart in Moscow on the sidelines of the SCO Foreign Ministers meeting. We had a discussion and we agreed on the importance of early disengagement. And since then, there have been meetings on site, so to speak, between the military commanders assisted by diplomats. That is work in progress. So at this moment, I really don't have more of a readout.
Well, like you say, there's been several rounds of talks, both diplomatically and with the senior military leaders. And yet we're still seeing lots of Chinese troops and increased hardware at the border, and that's despite the oncoming winter. Do you think India will have to ensure a permanent army presence along the line of control with China, given the current signs? And if so, what are the chances that this might escalate into war?
No, look, I think, first of all, we regularly patrol the line of actual control. So, it's not a question of having a permanent or a temporary army presence. The army is there all the time and the army is constantly monitoring. But as I said, look, the discussions are going on. It's work in progress. And the first rule of my business is don't predict what is still going on. And I really think you can ask me this question in multiple ways, you're still going to get the same answer.
So you're not concerned about a winter deployment, which, as I understand, would be an unusual thing to have this increased troop presence in a permanent state along those extra mountaintops that India has seized in these most recent weeks?
No, again, look, as I said, we can keep going round and round on this. At this moment, discussions are going on. What is going on obviously is something confidential between us and the Chinese. And we will wait to see how this plays out. Now, where this would go, a hypothetical, speculative answer, first of all, I wouldn't give it. And whatever is my thinking at this time, obviously, I will keep it to myself.
Of course, of course.
That was your third try.
Before we go to our next question, let's go to the audience with our next polling question. What do you see as the main foreign policy challenge facing India today? The China tensions that we've just been talking about, Pakistan, or the US-China trade dispute, which affects India and its ambitions to take a bigger slice of the global supply chain. So we'll just wait for some audience voting to come in. And obviously, I'm not the only one who's interested in hearing the answers on China, Minister. People are very concerned about what's happening along your line of actual control along that border. Okay, so I think we can safely conclude that China is the thing on most people's minds right now. So we will go to the next question. India has given shelter to the Dalai Lama.
Do you mind if I react to that? Do you mind if I react to that?
Please do. Please go ahead.
Okay, look, don't get me wrong. I didn't say I was not concerned about what was happening on our borders with China. What I said was, this is an ongoing discussion, negotiation, call it what you would. And there isn't very much that I'm in a position to say in public, and I certainly don't want to prejudge it. But when I looked at the options that were posed, to me, they were partly tactical. Yes, I'm not minimizing the seriousness of the situation on the borders with China. After all, after 45 years, we've had military casualties on that border. And there is a troop build-up, which in many ways has no precedent in recent past. So the gravity of it is certainly there, which is why I saw the numbers out there in that bar graph which you put out. But what I would say is, rather than say the biggest challenge tensions with China, tensions with Pakistan or US-China, in a sense, these are tactical issues. I mean, they are expressions of larger structural challenges that we face. I would, in fact, put it slightly differently, and I tried to do that in my remarks as well, which is, for me, the China issue is really, can a rising China and a rising India find an equilibrium? And what you are seeing in the borders is today an expression of that that challenge, or the inability to meet that challenge. The Pakistan issue, of course, is an issue, but again, it is bigger than a tensions issue. I mean, there has been, for decades now, cross-border terrorism by Pakistan. So there's a underlying issue of really, what is Pakistan about? How does it see India? Is in this day and age, is the use of terrorism as a instrument of statecraft legitimate and permissible? And when it comes to the US-China issue, I think I said in my remarks that I see that as the big sort of overarching context, and the fact that it is harder to find common ground today makes it much more difficult to conduct diplomacy. So in a sense, you have my vote on all of them. Clearly, there are priorities out there, but they're all reflections of this larger, geopolitical complexity and how India is trying to deal with it.
Yes, that's true. And I think it goes to my next question as well. When you speak about, long-lasting geopolitical concerns. India has given shelter to the Dalai Lama since the 1950s. And these recent clashes that we saw along the border with China had a Tibetan soldier die in that fighting. Now, commentators in Beijing are very worried that India will seek to destabilise Tibet as part of this border conflict with China. What's your response to that?
No, look, I think, I see no relationship between the various issues or, points that you mentioned. What is the problem today with China on our borders? The problem with China on our borders is that for the last 30 years more, we have built a relationship, we have expanded our cooperation predicated on peace and tranquility along the border. Okay, in the 1980s, for example, we had virtually no trade with China. But because we had a series of agreements beginning with 1993, which sort of provided the basis for peace and tranquility on the borders, other forms of cooperation were built up. Now, if that underlying peace and tranquility is disturbed, if the agreements which the two sides signed are not honored, then clearly that is the primary cause of the disruption. So I don't think we should get into other issues which frankly have nothing to do with the situation currently in Ladakh.
Okay, look, moving on to a trade question now. In your recent book, you say the border and the future of ties cannot be separated. And we've seen India lead with restrictions on China, particularly via bans on apps like TikTok, over concerns about data security and reining in the influence of Chinese companies. Now, to what extent can India reduce its economic dependence on China? And is that an explicit goal with these options?
Well, look, I think, as I said, the basis for more cooperation, we've had more trade, investments, there are different common forms of societal cooperation as well. All of this was predicated on peace and tranquility on the border. So my concern is that for many of us who have seen this relationship grow, if you disturb its foundation, so to speak, then you cannot be impervious to the fact that it will have consequences. Yeah, I mean, it's nobody's desire to have those consequences, but that problem in a sense was not created on our side. So I would say that as a broad cooperative trend, the early restoration of peace and tranquility is good for everybody. But let's come to the issue of trade and economic dealings with each other. I think that's had its own problems. I mean, these are not new problems. I remember, I was ambassador in China beginning, from the middle of 2009. Even in 2009, which is more than a decade ago, we were concerned about lack of market access in China, about the non-reciprocal nature of trade, about the mounting trade deficit, which to our mind was not a natural outcome of our comparative advantages. And we would, the examples which were often cited were, say, IT services or pharmaceuticals, where we have been, I would say, pretty much universally present, and our competitive capabilities are not in doubt. But in the Chinese market, we were not able to make a dent at all. So the trade issue, in fact, has been going. It's been a very difficult conversation for more than a decade now. Not just a difficult conversation, it has gone all the way up. Our leaders have discussed it at the summits, and both recognize that this is a very unsatisfactory situation and something needs to be done about it. I mean, so far nothing practical has been done about it as yet. So, in a sense, you have two I would say independent or at least autonomous issues out here. One, the fact that the basis of cooperation has got disturbed by the disturbance to peace and tranquility in the border areas, and the other that there are sort of structural problems in India-China trade, and these have been coming, sort of, it's not something which can be papered over anymore. I mean, if you look at our trade deficit with China, I mean, the graphs like that. So people, even before the current happenings on the border, have felt that was not sustainable.
But I mean, to what extent can India reduce its economic dependence on China? What's within your control?
Well, look again. I would shift in a sense to a larger point, which I made right at the end of my remarks, which is to look at our trading arrangements and ask ourselves how well they worked for us. My own sense is that in the last decade, last 2 decades perhaps, Indian manufacturing has been very negatively impacted by many of our trade arrangements, and it's something which we seriously need to look at. So, what is happening today in India is actually a determination to rebuild our economy, to see that the kind of support our manufacturing, encouragement our manufacturing should get is given, and that other countries don't take advantage of our openness and use what works for them, including non-market means to sort of gain an edge over us at home. So I think these are issues of sort of assessing the pluses and minuses of our trading arrangements, and China is a very big part of it because our biggest deficit is with China. But in a way, I would suggest to you it's actually a bigger issue.
Well, in this case, the US has been very supportive of India through this border crisis with China. And certainly the two nations have become much closer over the past few years, particularly on defence and security ties. So how would you characterise India's relationship with the US, and to what extent can you improve it further, particularly in the defence security area with Washington?
Well, again, your question sort of suggests an immediacy to this relationship. I think the facts would show that this has actually been a 20-year trend. I think most people would agree that if you were to look at inflection points, one big inflection point was President Clinton's visit to India when Prime Minister Vajpayee was in power. The nuclear deal was another big inflection point. Probably Prime Minister Modi's visit in 2014 was another one. So it's been, I say this about the India-US relations. If you look at the American end, you have 4 presidents: Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump. I can't think of 4 more different individuals, and yet all of them, and with 4 very different policies. Okay. Yet all of them have been remarkably consistent in the priority that they've given to our relationship. Similarly, look at the Indian end. You've actually had, during this period, Prime Minister Vajpayee, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and now Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Again, you see a very sort of strong continuity. In fact, not just continuity; the relationship has actually steadily grown. So, I would propose to you really that this is something structural, that there's a very deep convergence today between India and the United States. And while, yes, defense and security is a very important data. If you societal contact, in fact, I mean, today, if I were to look at all our foreign policy relationships, this is the one which is most people driven. The fact that we have, I think, what about maybe roughly 4 million Indian American citizens, many more temporary residents of the United States, so many students out there. The breadth of this relationship, it's really quite extraordinary. If you look at the trade side, the technology side, these are real strengths of the relationship. So while I know that defense and security tends to get the headlines, I would actually say one shouldn't neglect what have been the real drivers of this relationship, because the defense relationship is actually in the current phase roughly about 10 years old, maybe a little more.
Have you got as much as you had hoped to get out of that defence relationship, though, in the last 10 years? I mean, there's a lot of items still on India's shopping list that it would like to have in its kit, particularly with this border dispute with China that you don't yet have from the US. How do you push that forward?
I don't know. I have double discomfort here. One, you reduce a relationship to the defense side, and then you reduce defense to shopping. So I'm not against shopping, okay, but I think it's a far more complicated sort of reality out there than your question would suggest. My sense is, and again, you're linking it to a very sort of immediate happening. That is, I mean, as I said, the record shows that is not the case. Our defense relationship were pretty much at the equipment level, pretty much frozen from the mid 60s for about 40 years or so. So they started really picking up about 15 years ago. And you have to ask yourself why. It wasn't, I mean, it reflected actually the changing world, the fact that India and the United States no longer felt that their interests were, clashing with each other. And defense is a pretty sensitive area, so you need a fair degree of comfort and confidence if you are, using each other's equipment. So it reflects a political convergence out there. So I would say look at the trends rather than reduce the matter to have a shopping list and how much of your shopping list did you get done.
Moving on to the US election, polls are showing that US President Donald Trump is down by double digits to Joe Biden. Are you worried that this progression that you've talked about of warming ties between the US and India through 4 different presidents or 4 different administrations, are you concerned that that might change under a Biden-Harris White House? And if so, could you explain some of those concerns?
Well, look, again, the point I was making was that the record over the last 20 plus years bears out the fact that this is a relationship which is deeper than the administration of the day, whichever administration of the day. Okay, it has spanned multiple administrations at both ends. By the way, it's not just an administration to government relationship. We are a relationship who are traditionally don't worry about elections. I mean, they happen, they move on. You sort of deal with the realities which elections produce.
Sure. Let's move on and look at one of the other dominant issues right now, which of course, as you've noted, is the coronavirus pandemic. Now, your ministry has announced plans to ensure supplies of COVID vaccines to neighbouring countries once it's available. Could you tell us more about India's plans and the discussion around sourcing and distribution of a vaccine?
Okay. Well, actually, when the Prime Minister spoke to this time we had a virtual UN General Assembly, he mentioned there as well that India would contribute its vaccine production capacity for global benefit. And the thinking that we are bringing to bear is in line with what we did during the pandemic. In the last few months, there was an enormous global demand on us for medicines which were specific to to COVID-19, particularly hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol. And we've actually ramped up capacities. We supplied medicines to 150 countries, and we actually ensured that a lot of countries who would have struggled otherwise to get them for financial or logistical reasons, we would sort of go out of our way to provide them with those medicines. So it's part of a mindset. I mean, we feel we can make a difference to the world by doing what we can. Again, we have a history of really, in a sense, a history of, I would say, internationalism, but also a history of solidarity with countries, with whom, to some degree, we have shared past. So I think that's a mindset which will operate also when we get into the vaccine production and distribution stage. Now, my understanding of where we are is that at this time, there are 3 separate sets of clinical trials which are going on in India. 2 of them relate to Indian vaccines, and these are, I think, at stage 2. The third one relates to the one which Serum Institute is doing with AstraZeneca. And I think that's at stage 3. Now, when these vaccines will come on stream, etc. I mean, that's really not my expertise. But we've also been involved in international initiatives, including COVAX, so that sensitivity that it must be available to everybody. It should be accessible, affordable. That sensitivity is very much there. And certainly many of our immediate neighbors have raised that issue with us, and we have obviously sought to reassure them. So our intent is to be globally contributive. I think that is in line with our record during the corona period. And like everybody else, I mean, I'm also hoping that the sooner we get the vaccine, the better we are.
Yes, we're all hoping for that. Let's move on now to the Quad and the Indo-Pacific. You've been instrumental in your role as Foreign Minister in building up the Quad relationship. What's India's main priorities? Where do you see the Quad going next? And how do you see cooperation between the Quad nations expanding?
Well, in a sense, let me tell you what Quad is about. I think you heard me use the word multipolarity in my remarks. Okay. Which in plain English means that there are many more powers who can make a difference or shape the outcome on a particular issue. Now, in the old days meaning, say, post-Second World War days till the 1980s, you had a sort of the Cold War. You had 2 camps. You had non-aligned countries. That was the broad landscape. Okay. Then after that, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and you had what was, for want of a better term, called a unipolar world, which basically meant the dominance of the United States. And a lot of countries sought, where they differed with the United States, to protect their interests at that time. And again, in diplomacy, the word which was used at that time was strategic autonomy. Now, right now, what you have is a dispersal of power. Okay, depending on the issue, different countries have converging interests. And now, it's not going to be easy to find an issue where you agree with somebody else fully. It's not going to be easy to find an issue where everybody agrees on that issue. So you're going to have this, a world of partial agreements, if you would, or issue-based groupings. Now, in the case of Quad, what has happened is 4 countries who feel that on many issues like maritime security, connectivity, counterterrorism, they felt that it was useful to have consultations and meet on a more regular basis. It began at an official level. It's now, from last year, it actually became at a foreign minister's level. So that has happened the second time in Tokyo early in October. And I think the sense is, okay, it's useful, it works for everybody, we all get benefit out of it. So that's really where it is. So it's a kind of I would say, a diplomatic consultation, understanding between 4 countries. Now, it's not unique. I mean, if you look at it, BRICS is also a plurilateral gathering of countries, spread in multiple continents, who felt that their interests would be better served by working together. And there were a certain set of issues where they decided they would work together. Within Eurasia, we have a subset of the BRICS. It's called RIC, Russia, India, China. Now, these have been practices going on for many years. I mean, it has been going on for almost 20 years now. BRICS has also been there for more than a decade now. Sometimes, there are I'd say arrangements or agreements which are more formal. Like we had one with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They had their sets of issues, their sets of players, their own scheduling, etc. Sometimes it's more informal, sometimes it's somewhere in between. So, but this is today the new world that we have entered into. So I think people who have a forward-looking perspective, who truly appreciate multipolarity, they should understand and appreciate, Quad, even if they are not members of Quad. I mean, they should say, yes, this is a changing world, and it's natural that countries would come together. And this is not the only example of countries coming together. So, I think the problems happen if you have a sort of older mindset, and then it sort of becomes us versus them. I don't think that's really future.
Okay, thank you, Minister. We'll now go to our audience question session. We've got a little bit of time left. First up, we have a question from Akhil Berry, who's from the Eurasia Group. He's asking, India is set to receive the S-400 missile defense system from Russia next year, which would trigger those CATSA sanctions from the US unless you're granted a waiver. How concerned are you about the potential for sanctions?
Look, again, India has a long history of defense and security with the Soviet Union and with Russia. It's an older history than we have with the United States, at least in the current phase. So the basis today for countries dealing with each other is that we have our interests, our partners have their interests, and you work out how that works. I don't think international relations should be run and I'm not necessarily talking of this particular example, I would make it a wider proposition. It doesn't work if, one partner says, well, I have these are my views and this alone will prevail. So there's a lot of give and take in diplomacy, and I see no reason why that give and take should not work out.
Okay, one question here we have from Michael Kugelman from the Wilson Center in Washington. What are India's top goals in its relationship with the US right now, and how does it plan to pursue them?
Look, it would vary because it's, again, the American relationship is such a broad relationship today. I mean, you would have political goals, you would have defense and security goals, there would be trade goals, there would be issues regarding movement of talent, technology issues. So it's really a very, very broad-based relationship, I would say, with and a relationship with growing ambition. So I'm very confident. I've been associated with that relationship off and on almost now for 40 years, and I've seen it really change remarkably for the better. So I do think that given the potential of the relationship, it's important to have the right degree of ambition, to set out, sort of goals commensurate to our vision of that, and really have the confidence to pursue them, and not, necessarily get distracted by the sort of problems of the day. I'm not saying those are unimportant. I mean, in diplomacy, the daily grind is as important as it is in business. But I think it's important to have a sort of a larger strategic view while working it on a daily basis. And given the track record of the last 20 years, I remain very optimistic about this relationship, as I do about most other relationships, by the way. But this one, particularly, I think the record bears out that it is something of considerable potential.
Thank you. And we'll go to a question now from Raki Prasad from Alder Capital. How can India use its strength and improve its exports with key trading partners, and which sectors are we trying to focus on?
Part of the thinking of what I spoke to you about, Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, was really to build the strengths within the country which would make us a more effective player abroad, and a lot of those are economic strengths. Now, we have seen in the last 2 decades that to a large extent our manufacturing took a hit due to cheap alternatives coming, which really came because they were produced in a very, very different environment. But what you have, what you are seeing in India today is really, in a sense, a much more broad-based, deeper reform which the country has long awaited. So it is very likely today, say, if you take agriculture, where recent reforms in agriculture have really freed up the space for much more competitive, productive agriculture, that you will see India much more active in that space. I think if we are fair to our industry and give them a truly level playing field, I'm very confident that you will actually see a lot of our manufacturing exports grow as well. And there's been, particularly in the last 6 years, a very determined effort to make it easier to do business, to actually sit down with business and figure out their problems and respond to that. And you can see that. You can see that in growing FDI numbers. You can see that particularly, I mean, it's interesting, even in this lockdown period. Actually, I think people have seen how responsibly we have handled a period of great stress. And my sense, even if I say so myself, is I think the world has much in India, and that is reflected in actually uh, new uh, their global chain. Outside, I said on the digital front, we are a much stronger power. And since today trust is an important part of uh, supply chains, I think that quest for more resilient and more trusted supply chains should certainly bring more business into it.
Thank you, Minister. And I think we have time for one more question from Vetri Subramaniam from UTI Asset Management. What are the economic priorities of our foreign policy?
The economic priorities, I mean, there are the obvious ones. Today, there isn't a country in the world which doesn't put promotion of trade right up there. But in the case of India, the world market, but also as a global workplace. One part of it is the obvious ones, which everybody does, investment interests. There's a lot of attention ability issues to the demands of economy and the movement of talent. But that there are resources,
That's the last question, and we appreciate you spending your time with us this evening. Back to you, Jeanette.
Thank you once again, Minister Jaishankar, and thank you, Ruth, for that wide-ranging conversation. Minister Jaishankar touched upon the space for India in a multipolar world, and also the importance of distribute any value on the latter and the economics of it. We're now to correspondent.
Jeanette, thank you so much for that, and hello from Singapore. Now, in this segment, we're going to take a look at the pandemic of a business leader in the biopharmaceutical industry. I'm really privileged to Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, chairperson and managing director of Biocon. Biocon has joined the race to develop a drug for COVID-19, and Kiran has suddenly been vocal about tapping science to contain the virus. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Now, Kiran, I want to bring up this chart to perhaps show it's been for India and how cases escalated before easing in recent weeks. In your view, how did India, with 7 million confirmed cases, despite
So in uh, infection, so you can 6 out that's the that 0 15 or have which is also
Look at the experience of India. What could have done to avert this blowout?
so I think India, like any other country, preparation before it lifted the lockdown. In many parts of the country, have done something which is put a restriction of public spaces, festings as a result of that. Halls, malls, and many of these public spaces have not been allowed to open up in most parts of the country. But understand and agree, livelihoods are very important for any country. Economic lockdown is something as an economy, and I think people need livelihoods. So while livelihoods are equally important, we have a choice. But I think what is extremely important that we have a very distancing, and these are very critical. And I think are in this field of biotech and pharma. I think we have seen that aggressive does help. It does bring down and reduce the test positivity with a 10% rate, and it's down below 2% aggressive testing and containment. Scientific of random testing contain those hot spots. I think those, and we needed to have done that post the lockdown as well.
Slightly later, you talked about economies need to open up. I really is as seeing it in its regulations. There is that India is ready for people to go to schools to also start opening from today.
Well, let's put it this way. While some of these need not open up, I think businesses have to open up. And so are going to make aggressively shown that this, at least the of our India can track and I think many that even ought to do a scientific containment and tracing, because that's what they've forgot.
And
Days of testing. For instance, whilst art thing called, you can in a pool and actually go up to a much higher level is better. Actually, testing tenfold. If you combine that with rapid anti-validating kind of sensitivity, reagent tests, and there are tested. Got two testing at the and another scale, and I think that's what countries need to do, because this pandemic is, you do need to test, you need to treat properly, because I think that's to focus on. We have understood the disease better. We know that there are phases of the disease. Most people only get affected by the first phase, and the few others who get affected into a patient. So I think there are a number of strategies, but I think we're going about it in a manner. Opinions count, and science is not being looked at.
India is India. Are you confident of that?
Say that because then you know when you tracking the numbers who are in phases, and you feel that you're flat, a few days later you again see a surge. So I don't think we're for me personally, a large number of people are getting infected, but certain case fatality rate is reducing. Hope that we're learning to manage the disease better. If you can bring down your death, I think we're today. Care is that the more affected,
I think India.
Well, I think we have a younger people, virus much faster, older morbidity that a come age and you know compromised patient, people with poorer really don't make, but by just 1.5 million, almost 6 covered, and or one little over a million people who are regarded as active. We've had about 110,000 thereabouts, the number of fatalities. Perspective, India that gives you, it's not as it is perceived. But certain countries have not been that fortunate, serious of the virus. Having said that, I think what really concerns is that this pandemic has had a huge, and I think not out of the woods, fearful of the disease, and it's. So I think that is really the worry.
Are you considering it's coming? Talk about how winter.
Well, I think many parts of the world are very. I think many parts of the world are very. That is already becoming visible in Europe world. As far as India is concerned, and I think we've seen the surge. I don't think impact of the winter, but having said that, there are parts of the about the impact of winter. What I would really like to focus on, structured approach to tracing, to contain
As the government in ensuring that.
That's $1 million digital experts to really work out these models. I know for a fact that in our own state of Karnataka, in Bangalore, many of us in the corporate world got together. We used technology very intelligently to see how you can do some of this. But it's never easy to get governments to adopt many of these practices. So we keep adopting it in the workplace, and it works very well.
Kieran, before the next question, I'd like to bring up this polling question for us and listening to this conversation. The question is aligning up the first.
We are all in it together. We need to be a collective force, a collective effort in basically dealing with this pandemic. By being nationalistic and just making sure that your populations are vaccinated doesn't protect a country that may not be vaccinated. I think we have to go about the availability of a way that makes sure the interests of the populations, and make sure role in a very well thought out way. And I think this is not what is happening today. I think countries are becoming very sort of self-centered. The pandemic has shown you that it doesn't matter where you are, you can be infected despite being a rich or a poor country, despite having the best healthcare system or the worst healthcare system. I think the virus doesn't distinguish or know borders. So I think from that point of view, we need to make sure that we go about it in a strategic way that deals with the rollout of the vaccine across the world in a way that protects the most vulnerable parts of our populations, and also deals with those who are frontline workers who are actually facing the virus much more than others.
That is the ideal situation, Kieran. Realistically, the richer countries getting access to the vaccines first before the poorer countries, is that how it's likely to play out?
Well, unfortunately, it is likely to play out in an unfair way. Of course, I do commend COVAX, because I think COVAX is trying to make sure that LMIC countries get access to vaccines almost simultaneously. And I'm glad that a large number of countries have signed up for the COVAX initiative. Over 170 countries have signed up till now. And I hope that through that effort, at least the poorer parts of the world will get access to those vaccines as and when they roll out.
We had Serum Institute's Punawalla recently saying that India will need 11 billion and distribute the vaccine to the nation. That amount itself sounds pretty challenging.
So yes, India has a daunting challenge because it has such a huge population. But having said that, India is also fortunate that it has the world's largest vaccine capacity. And fortunately, India is already, collaborating and doing vaccine development on its own. So hopefully, we will have a large, capacity and a volume of vaccines available for deployment in India, and as well as exporting vaccines to other parts of the world. So from that point of view, I think what we need to do is to really plan the deployment of vaccines very well, because, for a country like India, the biggest challenge is going to be the cold chain logistics. We've done it very well for the polio vaccine, but that has been done over an extended period of time. Now we have this daunting challenge of rolling out a vaccine in a very short period of time and at scale. So how are we going to do that? And I think that is what India needs to look at. And I think India has a unique opportunity of using digital technologies to create that database of vaccination, which I think is going to be very, that you're not going to just have one vaccine. You are likely to have to track each one of those vaccines, since we are developing them in such is extremely important. India is the only country that has this unique identification number at such massive scale. If we can link that to the vaccine, it will create a very, very efficient deployment of vaccines, so that in the future, if we are seeing that events of a particular vaccine, you can quickly track down those people and see whether they are suffering from those same adverse events or not. Equally, you know that many of these vaccines require a second booster dose. So to ensure that the people who are vaccinated have indeed received their two doses is also going to be very important. And without digital technologies to track every single Indian who has taken a vaccine and makes sure that they've done it in a compliant way, is going to need digital technology.
Kiran, this is the question. How soon do you see an approved vaccine being available to Indians?
As you know, many countries are trying to come up with emergency. And I think this is what I think is the likely scenario, that by the end of the year or maybe in January, you're likely to see at least a few emergency use authorizations being issued by various regulators, including the Indian regulator. This will mean that you will have access to the vaccine in small quantities, but I think it's likely to ramp up very rapidly in the months ahead. And I think by the middle of next year, you should have vaccines available in a reliable way at scale.
Are you concerned that we could be into the market without enough safety data?
Well, I think that is a concern because Sindha, as you know, that for instance, you are not years durability of response these vaccines are going to be approved in a very, very abbreviated phase. And I think this means that we just don't have enough data. All that you're measuring right now is an immune response that response. So would you need to vaccinate yourself here or others? Available to us, and unfortunately thing is at this point we will need durability data. All we can say data in terms and what the approvals are.
I just want to from a participant and to do with India is the best in a country that a place.
So I didn't get the last part of your question because you said what in a country like
that doesn't really have apart from inward.
No, I think because getting into a state of preparedness, there is a, and I think this is also levels. So getting into a prepared exercise that by we will to say that we and that and I we must use a digital platform vaccines like mentioned.
Here in a better pandemic in terms of hospital treatment in case increase in active cases in the sense of all these aspects.
Unfortunately, the answer is no, because if things get worse, we simply don't have the capacity to deal with with the large numbers of people who might land up in hospitals. I think as far as testing is concerned, obviously we need to ramp up our testing if that happens. Right now, we're just dealing efficiently with symptomatic cases. And I think all that is happening because our indigenous industry has, I must say, with are using rapid antigen PCR tests, as I mentioned, helping to sort of tests by pool testing. So I think some parts of the country are way than other parts of the country. Not in a stage where you can say that we are testing. Certainly not. The so challenge is that manageable at this point in time. But if the active cases start surging, then we simply don't have the capacity to deal with it.
Kiran, this question has to do with the education policy. Will India's new education policy produce more vocational people, giving companies more employable graduates who don't need expensive additional training?
Look, any new education policy takes time before you actually see the impact and the effect of that policy. I don't think that we can really rely on quick results. This is going to take time, but I think the new education policy has spelled out some new ways of educating our people, new ways of skilling people. I think they're talking about project-based learning, apprentice-based learning, and all that augurs very well for the education of the future. I think online education has also become a very important part of our education system today. But as you know, these are early days. We will need to understand how online education, hybrid education models are really going to create the kind of employable human resources that we want. At the moment, in corporate the corporate scenario, I think a lot of these training programs are benefiting from online courses, and I think AI models and data analytics is giving us an understanding of how people are learning. But these are early days, and I really believe we need to evolve these new educational models over a time of at least 5 to 10 years before you can be confident to say that, yes, it's going to give us the kind of people that each sector needs.
Kieran, I can't speak to you without asking you about the Indian economy. What do you deem as the prospects, the outlook for the Indian economy, given that it's heading towards its worst contraction this financial year?
Yes, I think, this year is a very challenging year. And yes, as it's been forecast, our economy is likely to shrink by 10%. But having said that, I think we do need to really look at the economic opportunities that India has. This pandemic actually has unleashed a huge potential for India. The agricultural sector actually has started performing very well, and we need to get into value-added agriculture. I, for one, believe that entrepreneurship is something that ought to be, amplified as much as possible. And I think we are seeing this happen at this pandemic time, because a large number of new opportunities have arisen, especially in this COVID world, this virtual world, where there are so many new services that have emanated. The digital world has also created a large number of opportunities. I think regulations that prevented a lot of these businesses have been forced to accept that telehealth, telemedicine, e-pharmacies, online retail, and everything that goes with the digital world, which was not being allowed by the regulators, has forcibly been accepted. So I think there are new kinds of job opportunities that India has created. So when India has always been talking about this huge market that India is, which people felt that wasn't a very attractive market, I think we can create that market. And then I think a large number of Indian companies have been forced to think about being globally competitive from an export point of view. And I think this is another big opportunity. So whether it's, the pharma industry, which of course has always been a very export-oriented industry, I think the other industrial sectors, the engineering sectors, and the textile sectors and what have you, I think there are a large number of opportunities. If we play our policies well, I think we can actually revive our economy in a very robust manner, and we have to be forward-thinking. I think we get very trapped in draconian policies which need to really be looked at in a very different way. I think ease of business is something we have to look at, and we have to become much more competitive in terms of getting businesses to be more efficient because of removing half the regulations that stifle it.
Is the government doing enough, though, Kieran? I mean, so I guess expect that the government can do more in terms of fiscal stimulus.
I really don't think we need fiscal stimuli more than what has been given right now, because I really think just easing regulations will give you the necessary stimulus that you need to run your industries and businesses more proficiently and to actually generate more cash in the system. I think today the regulations are making it financially elicits the same kind of response. And by doing that, we found that the patients who took the drug did very well, and those who didn't take the drug had a much longer kind of recovery process, and some of them also died. So I think we are now trying to do this at a much larger global scale, and we've licensed this drug for other applications to a US company. So they are about to start a COVID trial in the US and Latin America to basically use it in a much bigger way.
Of course, final question is
in India, of course, we are using it.
What's the progress on Biocon biologics?
Well, Biocon Biologics, as you know, is one of the frontier biosimilars company, and we've been very successful in developing a pipeline of biosimilars, which, as you know, is the next big opportunity in the pharma world after generics. And these biosimilars actually are going to sharply bring down the healthcare costs by reducing the cost of these very expensive biologics. And we as a company have got a global play, and I think along with our partner Mylan, we have actually entered into many of these global markets very successfully. And this is a business that we believe is going to be a very large business opportunity for Biocon, and we intend to unlock value from this business in the next few years through hopefully an IPO.
It's even likely that question, Kiran Mazumdar Show. We thank you so much for your time today. You've been so generous. And Jeanette,
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
A very strict lockdown. We soon figured out that we needed to get the balance between lives and livelihoods. And I think we're now getting that balance better than what it looked in March, April, and May. We also need to keep in mind that India is also governed through different states and federal territories. Therefore, one of the things which India is now working towards is a better coordination between the center and the states. And that is one area where this coordination can improve further as we go along.
Okay, let's talk about the economy for a moment. The pandemic has had a unfortunate effect on the economies around the world, certainly in the United States. What has been the effect of the pandemic on the Indian economy? And do you think the worst of that is over?
No, in India, the financial year is April to March. So the first quarter is April to June. India had a very rough first quarter with negative GDP close to 24%. Since then, we are seeing a recovery to move towards an average negative GDP a year, which is estimated to be around the 10% mark. Therefore, there is a significant signs of an improvement as I talk in many, many sectors. And this is actually giving us confidence that the second half of this fiscal year, which is October to March, should be a period of recovery, and we should be close to 90-95% of normalcy by the last quarter, which is January to March.
So in the United States, of course, there's been some criticism that the government should have done more to deal with the economic effects of the pandemic. Obviously, they're
lead to the current number on center plus state fiscal deficit to about 13% of GDP. And the government has therefore been more cautious on increasing the fiscal deficit dramatically. On the other hand, the plus point is the monetary policy has been much more accommodative. Therefore, a much greater move on the monetary policy side has happened. On the fiscal side, there is still some conservatism because the government debt to GDP ratio is likely to go to more than 85% thanks to the spending on the pandemic.
So in the United States, we often now look around the world and
healthcare spend is something we need into the future. And the second big challenge India has faced is challenges between how different states have acted versus how the center has responded. And a greater coordination between the center and states would certainly improve the situation in terms of effective delivery. Having said that, one of the things the pandemic has also brought about is there is a very delicate balance between protecting lives and livelihoods and potential lives out of loss of livelihood. Therefore, India is now getting the balance which is moving more in the direction of also focusing on livelihoods, which can cause significant impact to life itself. Therefore, India is on its own track. It has had its challenges along the way. It is learning along the way. And I do believe that India will navigate its own path, but I'm more hopeful in the last few weeks than I was feeling in the month of August and September.
Okay, now my own firm has been a reasonably large investor in India in the private equity space. If I ask you now, as I'm about to, what are some good areas foreign investors might invest in India? What would you say are the attractive areas right now?
My first recommendation to you is, David, follow the Indian entrepreneurs, what they are doing. And when you're making investments in India, and you know very well, you need to ensure that you're investing in companies where you trust managements, where, of course, they are in the right sectors. And that is obvious in the post-pandemic world. What are the sectors which will make sense, which is digital, the entire e-commerce segment, the technology segment, the pharmaceuticals, consumers, but even some of the segments which may be out of fashion today will see some winners in the days to come. And I have always believed when you invest in India, when things look more challenging, that's the best time to put your money to work.
Okay, so when you travel the world, and you're probably not traveling that much right now, but when you talk to people around the world, do they ask you, is it a good time to invest in India? What is your response?
See, I will go back to examples when things have looked challenging in a country like India, but those have been the times when best investments have happened. You go back to the 90s, post the Asian crisis, India was a place where investors were very cautious. That's the time when we had the whole nuclear blast, as a result of which India was out of fashion. Best returns have been made on investments for people who have invested around 99 to 2003. And those returns have been phenomenal for investors. Therefore, I do believe that if you look at valuations, you look at the right entrepreneurs, if you look at the right businesses, this is a to invest, because macroeconomic India on the external front is much stronger than the fragility it had in those days. I am therefore quite confident that there are businesses, and there is obviously consolidation and concentration in terms of the choices you have. But if you make it right, this is certainly a good time as ever.
So let's talk about a sector you know extremely well, which is the banking sector. How has the banking sector fared during the pandemic? And what do you think the banking sector's prospects are over the next year or so?
So if you look at the banking sector, David, first of all, the structure of the sector is the state-owned banks are nearly 60 to 65% of the total sector, and private sector banks are now about 35%. When I look at the future days ahead, I see this ratio in the next 5 to 10 years moving to more around the 50-50 mark. I also believe the state will have to take tough calls on the future of state-owned banking. As we go forward, banking sector is ripe for a significant structural change and a reimagination. The banking sector also is finding new opportunities and challenges coming out of customer change to a technology and a digital platform. Therefore, I genuinely believe the sector will reinvent itself with few winners and losers.
So how did you get into the banking sector? Because your family was not in the banking sector. It was in a different business. So what prompted you to get into the banking sector to begin with?
It started after I completed my MBA. I had an option to go out and work in a company which like Hindustan Unilever, where I had an opportunity to do. And that's where I had a chat with my father. He said, why don't you think about a career on your own? Family business is commodities, but why don't you chart your own destiny? And I took up my father and started, based on his advice, with about a 300 square foot office space, which he was good enough to give me from the family office area, and that's when I started the whole concept of financial services. In those days, the first opportunity came to us a product called bill discounting, which is in some ways like a commercial paper. And it essentially is suppliers to companies where the payment comes after 90 days or 120 days. And the rate at which banks were offering bill discounting, in those days I was not a bank, banks were offering bill discounting at a rate of 17% irrespective of rating. There was no concept of rating. It was controlled by the central bank, and any borrower had to pay 17% rate, including a Tata company. So I had a friend of mine from the MBA class who had joined a Tata company called Nelco. And I started a business discounting bills of Nelco. In those days, banks used to give 1% on deposits and charge 17% on discounting. So here was an opportunity. So I went to a few family friends and said, instead of 6% on a bank deposit, what if you got 12% on a Tata risk? And I was in business. So effectively discounting a bill at a more competitive rate than a bank. So instead of 17, 16, and offering it to investors at 12. And that was a 400 basis point spread and a new financial intermediation business, which got me going in a whole new area. And it was the beginning of a story, because then I was quickly able to raise capital, which was a huge amount of money, about $80,000 from friends and family, and I was in business.
And did you take on a partner at that time?
Yes, after doing business with Tata, I started doing business with Mahindra, and I got to know Anand Mahindra quite well. So I was happy to invite him to take some equity in the company, which Anand willingly did. And he took at that stage close to 15% stake. And I also was happy to request him to have the name of his family in the name of our company, which is why we became Kotak Mahindra Finance Limited, which is now Kotak Mahindra Bank.
So why did you have the self-confidence to put your name on the organization? Sometimes people don't put their names on because they're afraid if it doesn't work out, it wouldn't be good for their name. But you had enough confidence, I guess, to put your name on?
David, my learning came from the great success stories of the US. I still remember reading books, and thereafter, of course, my first visit to the US later. Some of the biggest names in the US, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, are all family names started by individuals and families who put their name on the line to build trust and confidence, and thereafter have become global financial institutions. The Mr. Morgan may no longer be there, but JP Morgan is one of the biggest and the most successful financials in the world. So my inspiration came from there, and which is why we believe that we must put our name on the line to build trust and confidence of our customers that this is how much we care for the business. And that is the basis of putting our names in the name of our company.
I think Mr. JP Morgan is there. He's just been reincarnated into Jamie Dimon. But anyway, that's a separate issue. So let me ask you, how come your bank has been able to grow at such an enormous rate? I think virtually no other bank in Asia or India has grown at the rate you've grown at. How did you do that? What was your secret?
David, it's just about common sense and looking at opportunity one by one. So after this bill discounting business, the next big opportunity which we got was in the car financing business or auto financing. In this, there was a shortage of cars and there was a long waiting period. And as I mentioned, the bank borrowing rates were 16%, and Citibank started car financing in India for the first time and effectively at an IRR of 33%. So we innovated. Citi was financing cars. We said we will book cars, and we started booking 5,000 and 10,000 cars and promised delivery of the cars immediately to customers, provided they took financing from us. And we had a very simple condition. We would be fair. We would charge the same rate as the Citibank. We were a small little company, and we would give the car immediately. And that's how the car financing business took off in the early 90s, following which the next big opportunity was capital markets, which is where India was in very early stages of capital markets. So I reached out at a Euromoney conference to some partners at Goldman Sachs, post which I made a visit in 1992 to Goldman and convinced them to get into a joint venture with us in 1994-95. And that's where we learned the ropes on how the global securities markets and investment banking markets work. So we went into that business as well. So, and thereafter, Ford Motor Credit was getting into a partnership with Anand Mahindra in the car business. And we went into a joint venture with Ford Motor Company in the car financing business. So we converted our car financing business into venture with Ford. And I must say, we learned enormously both from Goldman and Ford. After that, the next big opportunity came in asset management, which was opening up, as also the life insurance business in the late 90s and early 2000s for us. Finally, in 2001, the Reserve Bank opened up the banking licenses. We applied through the front door. We were given a banking license and we became a bank from a finance company in 2003. I still recollect in those days, I was speaking to my friends at Goldman who were partners with us in the securities and investment banking business. And in Goldman, some of the individuals actually joked with me and said, "Hey Uday, why are you getting into a low ROE commercial banking business?" To which my answer was that I am focused on building a financial services business in India, and a banking platform is crucial for customer centricity. So we were fortunate, we saw each opportunity as it opened up and just went into it with a entrepreneurial zeal. And at the same time, one core thing of our culture always was risk management as the core to our leverage business.
By the way, in the United States, we have seen that business people who are successful often say, well, I'll try a different thing. I'll go into politics. I'll go into government service and I'll run for office. In India, is there any such tradition? And someone like you, very successful business person, would you ever be a candidate to run for higher office or something, become president of India or something like that?
David, I love my business. I love my job. I love building our company, and it's something which is a passion. I'm always available for service whenever the government needs me. Recently, there was a issue with a large and non-bank financial company which went into financial trouble called ILNFS, and the government of India asked me to become the non-executive chair and steer and work towards resolution of that financial institution. That was something I took upon that as a responsibility and as national duty. Therefore, always happy to do what is needed in national interest. But I love my business a lot, and I love building financial institution, which journey I've started nearly 30 years ago.
So in the United States, when you have large, successful companies like yours, sometimes people who are, let's say, the children of
is not necessarily to my son. There is a whole team of professional managers who will be well ahead in the opportunity. And Jai, if it's up to him and up to the bank, what works for them in the future.
Okay, so your career in banking came about in an unpredictable way. As I understand it, you would have preferred to be a cricket star, and in fact, you were a very good cricket player. But what happened to your cricket career?
David, I loved cricket as a sport, and I was a player, both a batsman and a bowler. At the age of 20, I was playing a cricket match on a ground, and I was hit by a cricket ball on my head right here. It was a pretty operated upon within 3 hours and narrowly escaped. I happened to be a product of a joint family, and my father and my grandfather at that stage basically said, Uday, enough is enough. It's time for you now to forget cricket. And the joke in the family, the ball hit on my head, did some cleaning up of my head, and I finally got more focused into work and my passion for finance, and that moved me away from my passion for cricket as well.
All right. Can you explain to an American what the appeal of cricket is? Because it goes on, it seems like for days and days and days. United States, we have baseball. It's over in like 2 hours or so, something like that. Football is maybe over in an hour. How come it takes days and days to play cricket?
David, that's changed. It used to be 5 days. Then it became a one-day match. And now the latest format is known as T20. That is a match which is for a total of 3 hours. It's like watching a movie. So that is now reduced to a 3-hour game in totality, known as T20. And that's great fun. Right now, one of those leagues are going on, which is amongst one of the most popular leagues anywhere in the world in terms of the size of revenue outside the US. It is known as IPL. The format of cricket has changed, and it's keeping pace with our times. And next time you are in India, David, I would be delighted to invite you to a game of 3 hours of cricket. I assure you it is not days and days and days.
Well, before the pandemic arose, there was an effort, I think, to build a big cricket business in the United States. I think a number of people who support cricket were going to build a big league here. I don't know if that's still going forward. I think it's probably in abeyance for the time being. But there was an effort to do this, and my own son was interested in getting involved in it, so that's how I heard about it. Okay, we'll see what happens in the future of cricket down the road a bit. Let's talk about something that also begins with a C, China. China and India have been competitors for, I would say, several thousand years, I suspect. But in more recent times, they've been competitors in becoming major global economies. Do you think that China has done things that has enabled it to become the leading manufacturer in the world? And are there things that India could do to also become a leading manufacturer? Or do you think India is best suited to do other kinds of things like information services or technology things and not compete as a manufacturing center with China?
I think, first of all, on China, my view is that China today, from an economic size point of view, is significantly ahead of India. India has a lot of catching up to do. Having said that, I'm really not sure about what kind of pricing practices China may have had, which have made it so competitive. India too has a significant trade deficit with China. I think the world is changing. The world is moving away from high concentration and dependence on one country for its manufacturing to a more spread out opportunity on manufacturing as well as greater resilience. And it is here I see a very significant opportunity for India with a fair pricing and a competitive business model to take share in manufacturing. At the same time, I do believe the COVID world is giving us two opportunities from an Indian point of view. Number one, making us a potential competitor to being the factory of the world, probably after China because of the lead China has. But the other place where India has a huge opportunity is to become of the world. If there is one change which has happened in the post-COVID era, is as far as business economic services are concerned, geography is history. And this big change has a profound impact and an opportunity from an Indian point of view in two ways. I could be sitting in anywhere in India to be serving a customer in any other part of the world from a technology or services point of view. Second, within India, from urban to rural India, I can be operating in a small village, and as long as I've got connectivity, and connectivity has become much better in India, to be able to connect anywhere else in the world via the digital and technology platforms available. Therefore, India has an opportunity not only competing in the space of the factory of the world, but a very big opportunity to compete in being the office of the world.
I see. So, okay, I understand. Now, let me ask you about this. Your son, you said, is now studying in the United States, and I guess maybe your other son studied in the United States as well. More typically, we see young Indian entrepreneurs coming to the United States and staying here, building companies. And in fact, it's often said that I think 1/3 of the companies in Silicon Valley are run by people who came from India initially. Whether that's true or not, it's a very high percentage. I don't know if it's 1/3, but it's a very high percentage. Why do you think it is that, leaving your own family aside, many people from India who are young tech-trained entrepreneurs or wannabe, they stay in the United States and they don't go back to India? Is that true, or is that something that's just a misperception?
David, it is true, and it's true. I was a college student. At least 2 of my 4 close friends migrated to the US and built a career in the US. One of them became a lawyer, and another one is working in a financial institution. I would say at many levels, the levels of quality of living, standard of living, and the compensation levels, especially for professionals, the US is a very attractive place. However, less open and probably not as transparent, so we really don't know how the thinking is. I would be surprised if many Indian entrepreneurs could build a future in China on their own. The same is not true for the US. And therefore, India's alignment from a political point of view and an economic point of view is more natural to the US. However, I will make a distinction between services and trade. On services, the relationship with the US is much closer. On trade, probably the Asian side is where there may be bigger opportunity.
And okay, so let's talk about the climate change situation, if we could. The United States, China, and India are the 3 largest populations in the world, and they are also the 3 largest producers of carbon in the atmosphere. Do you think it's an issue that people in India are worried about in terms of the air that they breathe and the climate that all of us on the earth have to face? Or is it less of an issue in India because of the need to worry about more pressing issues?
David, it's such for all the negatives of COVID, it's such a huge pleasure to see clear skies in cities like Mumbai and probably Delhi, especially in recent times. We have seen a huge amount of pollution as a big issue in India. And I think it's center stage. I must, in this context, also compliment our Prime Minister Modi. He has taken up the issue of environment and climate change and has been a signatory to the Paris Accord, which the US did not sign to the best of my knowledge. And it is driving the whole change of power into the renewable power as one of the biggest focus areas for India. I think it's changing. India is realizing that it has not given enough attention to environment and pollution over many, many years. It is paying a price for it. You just have to look at the city of Delhi in winter and how bad the air quality gets. Therefore, India has got it very much on its radar to focus on Mother Nature and improving the quality of environment and climate. However, the price for that is high. And that is where India has to ensure that climate change has to be a non-negotiable part of the future of our generation across all countries. And I have no doubt that India will support climate change initiatives globally.
The United States, we did sign the Paris Accord. President Trump pulled us out of it, but we're not technically out of it, I think, until another month or so. So depending on the election, it may go another way. But anyway, we're still technically in it, though obviously we have not been as good a partner the last couple of years, I would say, in my view. Let's go forward and talk about a subject that you and I have spent some time on, which is philanthropy. Clearly, when people are successful in the business world, they have more money than they might need to spend for their daily necessities. And so in the United States and around the world, there's been some emphasis on philanthropy. What is your interest in philanthropy? Are there certain philanthropic causes that you are particularly interested in?
David, we at our family level and at our firm, we have identified education for the underprivileged as the core to the future of Indians. And this is an area which is requiring significant investment, but along with it, significant capacity building to make a difference and make the change. And it is combined with the levels of poverty at the lower strata of society. Therefore, we have identified through our institution called Kotak Education Foundation to go out there and make a difference to people in the area of education and skills, particularly for the underprivileged. And that is my key drive. Another broader issue from an Indian point of view, David, is India is amongst the few countries which has pioneered the concept of making CSR a part of the DNA of every corporation country. Therefore, every corporation is obliged by law to spend 2% of its profits in the area of corporate social responsibility. And this, if well implemented, which is what Indian companies have begun to do, is our contribution for building a better society. And in that context, I therefore believe that doing good and doing well go hand in hand. So we are doing at our company level, we are doing at our family level, but I'm looking at finding ways and opportunities for significantly scaling it up in the years ahead.
Okay. Now, and Americans are often, and other people around the world are often hearing about border disputes between India and Pakistan, which seem to be going on ever since Pakistan was created. Do you think that's something the United States has to worry about because of the nuclear power that both countries have? Or do you think the India-Pakistan various border disputes and other challenges are in abeyance for the time being?
India and Pakistan have had challenges since 1947, when the British created a line which divided the two countries. And I don't believe that there is an easy solution to that fundamentally. Having said that, I think the issue is also about what should a country be looking at. From an Indian point of view, India has moved beyond just looking at Pakistan from the point of view of its relative position. India looks at its economy in a completely different space and has moved on in terms of building its economic position. I mean, Pakistan, on the other hand, has to figure out its destiny, that there is more to building a country than focusing on just one enemy called India. That's what my view about India-Pakistan situation is.
Okay. do people have to worry about any India-China border disputes? Because there seem to have been some skirmishes there recently.
Showing both across its political side through its defense or its border aggression as well as economic aggression. So I think it's a challenge. Certainly, India is up to it. India is confident that it can not only defend its borders, it is taking steps to ensure that its own domestic manufacturing and trade grows significantly, and which will have an impact on India's or will reduce India's imports from China. India has also become more cautious about allowing investments from China, particularly in areas which have high security risks. So India is taking a lot of steps to correct what was otherwise very open economic ties with China, and is definitely of the view that the current aggression is unwarranted, and India will do what it takes to protect itself both geographically and economically. I have no doubt about that. But it's a different point. We are getting into a situation where the China situation is a global issue. The US-China issue is also there. And therefore, the world has to take a view about how do you handle a new superpower which has begun to flex its muscles across the world.
So, as I understand Indian law, you will be required in a not too long future to step down as the CEO. And if it is true, what will you do when you're not the CEO? Will you still be the chairman, or how will you still exercise your influence on the company?
So, David, as of today, there is no law in force. There has been a discussion paper which has been put out by the central bank, but it's not a law as of now. Okay. My view on this is that long term, any institution has to work on an appropriate succession ability, which Kotak Mahindra Bank would obviously have methods and measures in place for long-term succession planning. The retirement age for a director as of today is 70. So I'm 61 as of now. So that the retirement age for a director is still a long way off. And as far as I'm concerned, irrespective of my role as a manager, which is something which at some point of time it will be appropriate and not in the immediate near future for considering a role as a non-executive director, but certainly not in the near future. But longer term, I think the issue is our commitment is complete. We are 26% shareholders as a family, and we have very committed to continuing as long-term owners, shareholders, and value creators for all shareholders. And I used to play Indian classical music, which also called and played an instrument called the sitar. I have not been playing it in recent years, but my current passion is Indian music, including old Indian music, and with family. I value it more than anything else. And my wife Pallavi and my wife is of course a trekker and marathon. So I often ask her, what joy do you get in doing all this? And she says, Uday, what joy do you get in your work? And for me, work is not work. I consider work and play as one and the same thing. There is no difference. It depends on your perspective. And therefore, I enjoy what I do. And I have enjoyed it every single day of my life.
Well, that's a very interesting story. We've covered a lot. Do we have some questions from the audience?
Yes, Mr. Rubenstein, we have some questions. Mr. Kotak, the first question, of course, goes to you. And it's on the lines of what you mentioned, foolhardiness versus conviction. And this is the question. India arguably performs best with its back to the wall. What are the reforms that you want to see to get India out of this crisis?
I think, Janet, there are three areas where India really needs to step up its medium-term investment. First, I think, is clearly in the area of healthcare. We need to increase our spend from 1.3% to at least more than double, because we are very underinvested in healthcare. The second is education, which you know is a passion for us. And third, of course, is Mother Nature and sustainability. So in the medium term, India must find resources to spend in these three areas. And it's crucial for building India's future. So that is one important area. The second one, I think, is in my sector, which is the financial sector. I think time has come for us to reimagine India's financial sector, and we have to really dramatically take advantage of opportunity arising out of technology and digital, on which I think the Indian government is giving a big push. Therefore, transformation of the financial sector across technology, risk management, costs of intermediation, effectiveness of financial institutions, and transformation of India's financial sector to a cutting-edge modern financial sector is something I think is crucial for our future. And that is what will enable us, India, to grow at much faster growth rates in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Kotak. Mr. Rubenstein, there's a question for you as well. It's actually the flip side of a question that you asked Mr. Kotak. And Mr. Rubenstein, this is your question. When you assess a foreign investment, what are the top traits you see?
If I understood the question, what are the top things that we assess when we look?
How do you rate India now?
If I understood the question is, what are the top things that we assess when we're looking for a foreign investment? Well, we're looking for an industry we understand. We're looking for a management team that we think is credible and can grow into the investment and make the company even better. We're looking for a company that is operating in a global setting, because today everything is really global. So we want to see whether we can expand the company's horizons to export or do things, manufacture in other places. We're looking for a company that we think has the right kind of business. We don't want to be in businesses that are, I think, not appropriate. So we're looking for businesses that we think have appropriate ESG factors and that we can help improve in those areas. In terms of India, we are a large investor in India, but as we just heard from our guest, we think it's a very good thing to align yourself with very talented entrepreneurs. So very often in India, we have made investments in companies where the CEO is an entrepreneur or the family is an entrepreneurial family, where we can help them in some ways, perhaps, but we really are depending on their skill set and their knowledge and what they've already built. As I look around the world, I'd say that the best places to invest in the world outside of the United States over the next 10 years or so are certainly going to be India and China. China, for all the obvious reasons. India has not been had as much capital from outside as China has had, but I do think in the next 10 years that will change, because I think India is increasingly seen as an attractive place in which to invest for foreign capital.
Thank you, Mr. Kotak, and thank you once again. Thank you for this discussion, the financial sector's very own T20 match. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I hand over to Arijit Ghosh, South Asia Managing Editor for Bloomberg News.